You know, every country has its secrets. But for New Zealand, one of those secrets was absolutely devastating, involving the suffering of 250,000 of its most vulnerable people. So today, we're going to look at the story of how that secret finally came out and explore the incredibly difficult journey that nation is on towards reckoning and hopefully healing.
Okay, so let's start with a number that's, well, it's just staggering. 253,000. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's the high-end estimate of children, young people, and vulnerable adults who were abused. And here's the kicker. They were abused in the very places that were supposed to protect them, in state and faith-based care. We're not talking about a few isolated incidents here. This was a systemic failure on a massive, massive scale.
And what's almost as shocking, for half a century, literally 50 years, from 1950 to 1999, almost all of these stories went unheard. They were silenced. Just try to imagine the weight of that silence, right? The trauma carried by entire generations who were told they were lying, who were dismissed, or just flat out ignored when they found the courage to speak out.
But that silence, it couldn't last forever. It is finally being broken. And it's all because of the incredible courage of thousands of survivors. Now the entire nation is being forced to look this dark chapter right in the eye and to finally truly listen to the voices it spent so long ignoring. So, how did this all come out? I mean, how do you uncover a secret that's been hidden for so long? Well, it took something really significant, a powerful investigative body called the Royal Commission of Inquiry. So, this Royal Commission was set up back in 2018, and man, did it have a monumental task. Its job was to investigate decades of abuse in both state and faith-based care. But this wasn't just about digging through dusty old documents. The most crucial part of this whole thing was that it centered on the direct personal stories of over 3,000 survivors who were brave enough to come forward and share what happened to them. And the scope of what they found, it was just immense. It revealed these really deep-seated problems everywhere they looked. I mean, you have horrific allegations of actual torture at places like Lake Alice Hospital and widespread sexual abuse at Maryland School. But it went even deeper. The inquiry showed how the system completely failed Maori, who were subjected to these forced assimilation policies that just disconnected them from their culture. And it uncovered the profound systemic neglect that disabled and deaf people had to endure. So, after years of these gut-wrenching hearings and investigations, the commission finally released its findings. And get this, it was a massive 3,000-page report. But it wasn't just some historical document to put on a shelf. No, it was designed as a blueprint for change. It laid out 138 specific recommendations for one key reason: to make sure this can never, ever happen again. The release of that report was a huge turning point. I mean, the evidence was right there. It was undeniable. So the nation's response had to start somewhere, and it had to start with one absolutely critical step: a formal apology from the Crown, finally acknowledging its failure. And that acknowledgement came directly from the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon. You really have to think about this from the perspective of the survivors, people who had been disbelieved their entire lives. So for them, hearing these words, "You are heard and you are believed," it carried this immense symbolic weight. It was a powerful promise that the state would finally share the burden of what happened. Okay, but as we all know, an apology is just the first step, right? It's just words. The really crucial question is, what happens next? This is the point where those words had to turn into real, concrete action. And that action came in the form of a plan called the Crown Response. So the government's response is built on this really clear three-part framework. First, they have to address the wrongs of the past. Second, they need to make the current care system safe, like right now. And third, they have to empower the people who are in care today and their families. It's really a holistic way of looking at a problem that has affected generations. And to back all this up, they put their money where their mouth is. The government made a really significant financial commitment. In the 2025 budget, they allocated $774 million. And that money has two main jobs: to improve the redress system for what happened in the past, and to make the care system much stronger for the future. So if we dig into where that money is actually going, you can see they're really trying to tackle the root causes. We're talking about major investments in really tangible stuff, like up to $71.5 million for a safer, better-trained care workforce, over $50 million to improve safety and dignity in mental health units, and this is a big one, $25 million for prevention,
for initiatives that try to stop kids from ever needing to enter state care in the first place. And this plan is also having a direct financial impact on the survivors themselves. Before this, the average payment for a new claim was about $19,000. Now, that average payment has been increased to $30,000. It's a really clear, practical change that's meant to provide a more meaningful financial acknowledgement of the harm people went through. And you can really see the momentum here. This wasn't just one announcement that faded away. Things happened pretty quickly. You have the national apology in July 2024. Then, just a few months later in December, a specific redress scheme was set up for the Lake Alice survivors. By February 2025, there's a new $2 million fund for survivor support. And by May, the whole formal plan was published. That's a lot of action in less than a year.
All right, so the foundation has clearly been laid, but what about the long haul? What's the path forward? How exactly is the system being rebuilt to provide ongoing support, and more importantly, to stop history from ever repeating itself?
Well, building a new system means creating permanent structures for support and accountability. For example, there's a new Survivor Experiences Service, which is a confidential place for survivors to share their stories and get help accessing their records. There's also a top-up payment scheme, which is huge because it lets survivors who settled their claims years ago access the new higher payments. Then you've got practical tools, like a new website called Casione, to help people find their personal records, and even new laws being introduced to ban things like strip searches. It's all about creating stronger protections for the future.
And amidst all this policy and all this talk of systemic change, there's a really important human element we can't forget. In 2025, the nation officially recognized 16 people in its New Year honors list specifically for their tireless work supporting survivors. And that's so important because it's an acknowledgement that this whole fight for justice, it was led by these incredibly courageous advocates and the survivors themselves.
So there's no doubt about it. New Zealand has taken some historic, undeniable steps to confront its past. It's moved from decades of silence to a national apology and a real, concrete plan for change. But all of this leaves us with a really profound question. After so many years of systemic failure and trauma that runs so deep, can an apology and a plan ever be enough to truly heal a nation? And that, really, is the challenge and a long journey that still lies ahead.